Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his team kick off their winter cabinet retreat tonight. The Liberals are preparing for Parliament to return the last week of January. Cost of living will top the agenda in Montreal as the Liberals seek a path back to favour among voters. A number of recent polls have also shown the opposition Conservatives outpacing them in the polls. Tomorrow, the cabinet will hear from top economists and housing experts, while the focus on Tuesday will shift to global affairs, including the upcoming U.S. presidential election. And for more on the retreat, we are joined live by CTV political commentator Scott Reid this morning. Scott, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Lindsay.
So before we get into kind of the meat of this and the details that might be discussed, can you just first point out the significance of having a cabinet retreat, why it's important for a government to do this?
Yeah, I know it's crazy boring to most people, but they're actually very important. Having worked in government, I can tell you that, you generally have two cabinet retreats, sometimes more, but generally two a year. You have one in the winter, usually in January, another one usually in summer, July or August. And it's an opportunity for the cabinet to really hunker down, be together for 2-3 days, and do a mix of business. So obviously you're going to talk about the agenda. You're going to talk about where you want to be. Are you on track? Are you off track? You can work in a lot of talk about politics. And because you've given yourself a bit of time, you can have guests, you can have presentations. It's a chance to do a bit of a deeper dive. And for governments that are in trouble, I would argue a cabinet retreat is particularly important because it's a chance for them to actually take stock and say, well, you know what, how do we get back to magnetic north if we're off course?
Do you think this government is in trouble? Do you think that's a good, this is a good chance for them to maybe get back on course?
Oh, I think their compass has been placed between magnets for a little bit now. They're way off course. And so, look, three big things loom over the government as this retreat occurs, right? You've got, and you mentioned a couple of them, you've got polling numbers, which no government can afford to ignore, that show that only 24% of Canadians actually want to see them reelected. That's a dire, desperate number. So that's a political reality that looms over them. Second, they've got a troubled economy. We've got cost of living, housing challenges, threat of almost zero growth looking forward. So those are big problems. And then finally, you've got the chaotic prospect of a returning Donald Trump to the White House. Could occur before the end of this year. That's going to upend the politics of every Western ally of the United States, because goodness only knows how you deal with a madman who literally promises that his second time in office will be a revenge tour.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of the hot topics that might be up for discussion during this retreat. Also, a lot of global affairs happening right now. Canada's kind of ongoing concerns with India. We've got the Israel-Hamas war. There's so much to go over. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned a couple. Do you think there's one focus in particular that ministers will be kind of honing in on this weekend, or are they going to cover a lot of these big ones?
Well, I always look to what a cabinet retreat says it's going to be about. I think there's an interesting clue there, particularly because the government, I think, has gotten off track, and I think it understands that it's gotten off track and disconnected from its voter base. It's kind of a back to basics pre-bill for this cabinet retreat. If you look at it, they're talking about, look, we're going to be returning the focus on the middle class and the economy. Yes, there are going to be other issues. We're going to talk about global affairs. Obviously, you can't avoid the subject of the war in the Middle East. Obviously, you're going to talk about your relationship with the United States. But I think that focus on the economy and the middle class, it heralds back to what they ran on in 2015. You hear a lot of liberals these days, quietly, over drinks, whispered in back corners, will say to you, we got to get back to what got us elected. Somewhere, somehow, we got off that path. So even the label that they're adopting, economic focus, bread and butter household economics, and trying to help people stay in the middle class or get in the middle class, that's what Justin Trudeau told people he was about in 2015. I don't think it's a mistake that they're trying to recapture that momentum and that focus.
I see, going back to basics. And obviously, in previous cabinet retreats, sometimes not much comes out of it, it appears. Do you think any new policy ideas could come from this retreat, especially as we touched on, the polls are not exactly in this government's favor, and maybe Justin Trudeau needs to kind of regain some of those voters he might have lost?
So that takes us to another thing that they've telegraphed. They've openly told us, they've warned us, they've given us notice that they are going to shower announcements upon us, and that they're going to be substantive announcements, and they're going to be detailed announcements. You're going to get one a day. Woohoo! We can get to talk 3 days in a row, maybe. So I think, that's an interesting thing, because if you're going to invite that expectation, you must meet it. Past cabinet retreats, particularly this past summer when the poll numbers really started to dive for the government, they held a cabinet retreat. And they just came out and sort of talked process and vagaries. They didn't have specific announcements. So I think they're trying to focus get themselves some momentum, give people some news to report on, and hopefully from their perspective, Canadians will hear the government talking and making announcements about the things that they care about: the cost of living, affordability, trying to get a house for your kid who's 25 or 30 years old. Those things that really matter, and notionally those things that will actually cause, really be the focus of how people cast their ballots in the next election.
Yeah, the things people are talking about. Okay, Scott, it's been great having you on today to break this down for us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day, Lindsay.
You too. That is our CTV political commentator, Scott Reid.